YOLO, Dan. YOLO. We're going to talk about the phrase, you only live once.
Yes. So anybody that's younger than, 45 or whatever, probably familiar with this. But if you're older than 40 or 45, you might like, what?
I mean,
this was it's almost like a meme before memes
yeah,
were super
I mean,
popular.
it really, this phrase probably hit its peak of popularity about 5-6 years ago, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, that's probably when I was seeing it most frequently.
It's still around. It's still a hashtag. It's still part of the cultural vernacular, so to speak.
And it's very popular with the college age type where it's kind of a phrase of abandon.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, I'm going to go parasailing, without whatever. YOLO.
Yeah.
Hashtag
YOLO.
You're doing something really, really crazy. I'm going to free climb up, a sheer face of granite. YOLO. That's kind of how they. And then they if they tweet about it or Instagram it, then they usually put hashtag YOLO.
Yes.
So that's where it's come from.
So you only live once. Dan, what's wrong with that? I mean, it's true. We only have one life. Yeah. So is this bad? Is this good? Is this a redeemable phrase? What do we make of this this idea of celebrating you only live once?
Yeah, well, I my issues with it, and again, the danger is, he's this old dude talking like, but
why you scallywags?
Get off my grass. The thing about it, there's some of us who overthink everything. I get that. I'm one of those people.
Mm-hmm.
Every time, that's one of the reasons why Donald Trump drove me nuts, is because he used imprecise language and exaggeration constantly. Mm-hmm. And at some point, you stop using hyperbole and you're just a flat out liar. Mm-hmm. Because words matter. And my problem with this phrase, my problem with, if it feels good, do it. And what's the one we did last episode?
You do you.
You do
this
you.
is kind of a cousin to you do you, don't you think?
They all are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the reasons why it's good to go through this exercise, because they're each nuanced, but they all have a root in unsound philosophy. And we have a responsibility not to think about things casually, not to be superficial in how we process information, because ultimately when we do that, we leave out important information that impacts how we make decisions. So the person who's you only live once, it kind of goes back to a kind of a James Dean. Now there's an old name back.
Wait a second.
He died
What's that?
He died before I was born. James Dean was one of
Rebel
the first,
Without a Cause.
Rebel Without a Cause. He was one of the first Hollywood icons of irresponsible youth. Live fast, live hard, die young, leave a good-looking corpse type thing. and that really was. Except he didn't leave a good-looking corpse. He left a horrifically mangled corpse, because that is the reality. The reality is, if you live without thought, catastrophe awaits. And so the idea, and it's a very nihilistic philosophy. So a nihilist, or nihilist, but a nihilist, they believe that this is all there is and that nothing really matters. That only what you're experiencing. It's also kind of existential, because existentialism says I'm only what I experience through my senses that matters.
And even I would say even a percentage of hedonism.
Live
it up.
Live it up for me.
Yeah.
It's all about the experience.
Yes,
it's all about the rush.
Yeah.
So so this YOLO is very popular among young people who like extreme sports, surfers,
living on the edge,
living edginess, and usually these are young men who are not yet 26 years of age. Now it's interesting that a lot of these younger YOLO type people. Being under 26. 26 is when the last part of the male brain hardens, so to
frontal
speak.
lobe,
the
baby.
Frontal lobe matures, and generally at that time you stop making some of the stupid decisions you've been making that are irresponsible and impulsive. So there is a physiological aspect to it. At the same time, not every 24-year-old is an idiot, or 22-year-old or 18-year-old.
Right.
So we can all think. So the idea of you only live once basically says, this is all there is. This is all to my existence, is what I experience. Therefore, to get the high from an adrenaline rush, to get the thrill from doing something extreme, to get the good sensations from getting wasted or being promiscuous or whatever, it really is the ultimate expression and the ultimate experience, because YOLO, you only live once.
Yeah, I know. On YouTube, my kids watch YouTube incessantly, but they I don't know how long ago it was, but they got into watching these parkour videos. You know what parkour is?
Yeah, where they're running in the
They're
cities.
just running and they're just
climbing
doing these
walls and jumping
climbing
off,
walls, jumping
over
off
buildings,
things. It's extreme, right? And there's something about, and I remember like looking over the shoulder, like and it is fascinating. Like it is. There's a part of it that you're like, I can't believe these people would do such. It's like,
let me watch another one.
I mean, there's a part of it that is very captivating, but I sit there and as I'm contemplating and as I'm kind of evaluating what's going on, the thing that goes in my mind as I'm watching these videos or evaluating, I'm like, what possesses you to do this? And I think what it comes down to is there is not a deeper purpose that these young people understand why they're alive. They don't understand the transcendent. They don't understand the idea of glory. They don't understand the idea of eternity. And so what you're saying is, they're living for these momentary highs to experience life to its fullest, no matter what that looks like. But it's, why do they need that? Because there is a void in their life that tells them your value is based on what you do, and you can't really, like, what's the purpose to life? And if that is a void, if there is no purpose, if we are just, cells put together, that have evolved from apes and eat and drink for tomorrow you die. I mean, that the philosophy that even Paul talks about in book of 1 Corinthians, then it makes sense to do this if that's how you view life.
Right.
But if there is, what the Bible teaches us, no, there is a purpose to life. We are placed here to honor, to glorify God, to live for His glory. And we can be a part of something that's not just temporary, but there is an eternal reward. There's an eternal life that is awaiting for us, the abundant life that we can have right now, and it's found through Jesus. And if that is not there, we will fill it with something.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we're seeing so many young people long for something to fill their life. And so how do we, Dan, how do we address the YOLO philosophy of life that seems to be, I mean, there is this void, but how do we teach our young people that this isn't what that shouldn't be the governing influence of our lives? Yeah,
well, it's going to be tricky for some people. There's no doubt, because there is something in youth, and particularly in men, and you can call me misogynist or whatever you want to. Young men have bodies filled with testosterone. Yes. Testosterone makes you, to some
take
level,
more risks.
Take more risks. Be willing to, try new things. Mm-hmm. It's why they send young men to war. Mm-hmm. So we understand that. But again, like we talked about in our last episode, even those impulses that are there because God designed us this way need to be accountable.
That's right.
And one of the ways you hold people accountable is to make sure they understand truth. The truth of the matter is, you don't only live once and then disappear. You do only live once, and it's either forever or it's temporary. For the believer, we live eternally. We have eternal life. But the opposite of life is death, and for the non-believer, they can experience eternal death. And you say, well, I don't believe that. Well, then you're probably not going to have a conversation with me anyway on this. Yeah. But you better hope you're right if you're going to do the YOLO philosophy. The other thing, too, is there is much positive to be gained by living within the construct that God has designed. It doesn't mean that you're going to be an old man before your time. It doesn't mean that you're boring. It doesn't mean that you miss out by living a life that is considered. And the considered life says, yeah, we have risks, but we take reasonable risk. And we live with the idea that if I do something crazy and I die, I leave behind people who love me, and it's going to devastate them. If I live crazy and I do something foolish while I'm driving, I may take a young father or a young mother out.
Right.
In other words, we don't live in a vacuum. It's not just about you. If you say, well, if it is just about me, if I, decide to, jump off of what do they call it when they do the free, the have the parachute, they jump off the building.
I forget what it's called. Yeah.
You say, if I die, it's just me. Yeah, no, it's not just you. It's about the children you might have had. It's about the wife and husband you might have left behind. We do not live lives disconnected from every other human being. Now, the other factor, too, is we need to be careful that we don't develop appetites that are unbiblical. And there is an addictive nature to adrenaline. There's an addictive nature to dopamine, to endorphins.
Yeah.
Not everybody is as susceptible to them as the next person, but for some people, these things are as powerful as crack cocaine. So you need to make sure you're not feeding irresponsible highs.
That's a good point.
And so even have some, one of the things the Bible teaches that is a dirty word in our culture is temperance. You don't do everything you can do. You do what you should do.
Yeah.
And there ought to be a temperance on. You say, well, if you believed that, you'd never go to space. No, I don't believe that. I don't believe that. I believe that there is
there's good risk.
There is good risk.
Yeah.
The world has advanced. God has created in us what I call a godly discontent with our current status so that we can
explore,
be
adventure.
more like Him, to learn, to create. All of these are part of how God created us. But again, they're created and given to us to be used for our good, God's glory, and not to be selfishly abused. And so the YOLO mentality, for as fun as it may sound for young people, needs to be considered in light of the greater context, which is, why are we here? Where are we going? What is really real? And when we think about those philosophical questions, the great metaphysical questions, then at that point, we use the freedoms we have, the energy we have, the creativity we have, but we use it responsibly.
So we did this a little bit. We took a little parentheses around you do you and talk about there's a redemptive strand through this. And I want to bring the redemptive strand through you only live once, because I think that I have two ideas that I want to run by you and tell me what you think about it. But the first is this, the idea of doing things that are adventurous and risk, calculated risk, sometimes we have to allow these things because of the nature of people. So, for example, when I have two boys, and there's something, especially when they're younger, right? They love to climb up things and jump off them, right? And we always had bunk beds for our boys. And one of the things that I always let my boys do this, but they would climb up on the top bunk, and I put pillows all on the ground, and I let them jump off the top bunk. I'd be right there, so they do it. It would drive my wife crazy. Why are you letting them do that? I said, because they're boys.
Right.
Because this is what boys do. They climb up things, and they want to see how high can I climb up something and jump off without being hurt.
Yeah.
Right? And you are there as a parent to make sure they're not doing things stupid, but there is a level. I think I want to just say this. Parents, let your boys do things that are fun for boys. Don't just say, hey, you can't do that because I wouldn't do that. You know what I mean?
This is really, really, really true. And this is why they need fathers in homes with mothers.
Yeah.
I mean, this is part of God's design. There is a tension, because dads would say, why don't you try it from this height eventually? Because dads tend to do that. We understand. And then you have the voice of reason, the mother who comes and says, oh, let's scale this back.
And sometimes it was a good thing that my wife said, don't do that.
However, if dads aren't in there, sometimes they'll wrap their kids in bubble wrap, and they grow up afraid of their own shadow. So that tension is good.
I think that, so here's the second thought, is that sometimes we can organize and structure our lives so much that we don't allow anything in that might be spur of the moment fun.
Yeah.
And I think that's not what we're talking about here. I think I'll give you a great example. I always I took my boys on these coming of age trips when they hit about 14 years old. And when I took Sage on his trip, we did a Reformation tour around the UK. So, and I had planned this whole thing out, and it was just him, me, and my dad was going to join us, and my brother Richard was going to join us in Scotland. So it was kind of a man trip, and it was going to last about 7 or 8 days. So we fly into London, okay, and when you fly into Europe, you have an overnight flight, and I usually only get like 15 minutes of sleep. Mm-hmm. And the key is what they say is stay awake until
as long as you can.
As long as you can, okay? Because if you fall asleep once you get there, you'll screw up your entire, circadian rhythm, whatever it is. But your sleep will be completely jacked up the rest of the trip. So, anyways, I've learned that. So we get there, and my goal is, all right, we're gonna hit the British Library. We're gonna do this. We're gonna do that. We have all these things planned. And so we go to the British Library, look at the Magna Carta, we look at the Codex Sinaiticus, and that might be the nerdiest thing that we did. But anyways,
so
I wanted my son to see these historic documents. So we go to this pub right across the street from the British Library, and we start conversing with some locals that are right there, some young guys. And they tell us there's some World Cup qualifying games going on all around Europe that night. So my son loves soccer, and we're just watching these games on the televisions in the pub. And these guys are like, hey, there's actually a World Cup qualifying game at Wembley tonight. And we're like, oh, cool. And I'm just thinking, yeah, but, they're going to be sold out. And he's like, no, there's tickets available. I said, how do you know that? He's like, and he called this number, said, yeah, there's tickets available. What you need to go is ask for the family. There's a family seating section where the tickets are only £20 a person. And so in that moment, like, you gotta understand, Rudolphs are not risk takers. All right, Rudolphs are like, plan out everything, especially on trips. It's like, plan out everything, everything has a purpose. I've used this as an illustration. There's a travel bin inside of me, all right? And anything that veers off the schedule, I suspect highly. And there's this moment where I'm like, take a train to a place I've never been, to walk up to a gate where I've no idea if there's tickets, and how long is this going to last? I'm going to be exhausted. And I'm just like, I look at Sage and I'm like, do you want to go? And he's like, yeah. And so we just we leave, we get into the underground, we take the train to Wembley. We walk through the pageantry. I go up to the window. I said, I'd like 3 tickets. They give me 3 tickets. And my son and my father and I saw a World Cup qualifying game from England at Wembley Stadium.
This is a great story till I hit soccer.
And it was one of those experiences that was like, I'm sitting there, I'm like, this is unbelievable.
I'm really impressed because I'm like you. I don't take risks.
Yeah. This was not on the schedule.
And I bet you Sage thought this is one of his epic memories.
Oh, it was one of the greatest memories, right? It was an unbelievable memory. We loved it. It was a wonderful trip. But we always look back on that trip and say, the Euros were this past weekend, and watching that game, and he and I were watching the game, the final on Sunday, and we're like, man, we were at that stadium watching a soccer game with England. And to me, those are if there's a redemptive strand through YOLO, that's what it looks like.
Yeah, and I think that's what causes people to do great things for God. But I think there's a biblical framework of that, and that is only one life will soon be passed. Only what's done for Christ will last. So if we're going to take great risks, take them for something that matters.
That is so good.
And so whether we're going to on a missions trip, I'm funny about that because I don't like to take a risk, but I love missions trips.
That is so true, Dan.
Yeah, but even when I'm getting ready to go on missions trips, up to the moment I get there, I'm a nervous wreck. Anxiety off the hook. And I'm like to my wife, I don't know why I'm doing this. This is stupid. Somebody else could be doing it. And then I go, and God does something huge in my life, and it's wonderful. And then when I get home, I'm like, I can't believe I did that. That's my wiring. And there are times when you have to ignore your wiring so that you'll attempt great things for God.
Yes.
And that's different than do this to experience a rush because this is all that really matters.
Reckless abandon.
Yeah. When we get to that point, and that's why, again, and this is the philosophy of our church. This is why we study the Bible the way we study the Bible. This is why we live our life. The unexamined life is not worth living. Ask the questions. Teach your kids to be critical thinkers. When you see a phrase that's very deeply integrated into pop culture, and take all the layers off of it and examine each of them. Be curious. Where does this phrase come from, and where could this phrase lead? Have these conversations with your kids. And oh, Dad, they make a big deal of it. It's just what we say. No, I get all that, okay? And I'm not trying to be a jerk. At the same time, let's analyze it, because what you do in analyzing it, what we're doing here on these podcasts, is we're teaching critical thinking skills, and that is at a huge deficit today.
Yeah.
And it's one of the reasons why we're susceptible to false doctrine, wrong philosophy, and ultimately unhealthy, unbiblical behavior.
Yeah. What we're doing is you're helping your kids develop a filter.
Yeah.
A biblical filter by which they are filtering all thoughts, actions, and behaviors through the grid of the Word of
And
God.
that's essential to good parenting, and it's essential to biblical discipleship.
Yeah, exactly.
Those things are important. Just because it's on TV doesn't mean it's worth watching. Just because somebody's posting it as a hashtag doesn't mean it's worth repeating. And just because somebody's saying it doesn't mean that it is good advice.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I'm just realizing this, Dan. I don't know if we've ever done this before, but we never introduced ourselves. But I've been Ben, and you've been Dan in this episode, and we are the teaching pastors at Life Fellowship Church in Cornelius. And we thank you so much for joining us today on Life Talks. We hope that even though you might only live once, you live for Jesus. Was that hokey enough to?
That's good preaching. Good preaching. I'm proud of you, Ben.
Thanks for joining us on Life Talks. We'll talk to you next time.